Hey folks, thanks again for dropping by for another Ant Panda video with lore of the game. We're going to be talking about Diablo 1, the original. In 1997, Blizzard North actually created this wonderful RPG isometric rogue-like video game that takes place in the town of Tristram, with a lone hero that has come from a lonely adventure somewhere, basically back to his hometown, and to find that the town has been taken over by demons from a church that was created by who knows what. And of course you can guess it based on the game, Diablo. But did you know that Diablo, even though it was created in 1997, that it actually had a very different story than what's been captured in Diablo 3, and I'm sure even with the latest one in Diablo 4. Well, again, since Blizzard had come out and discussed with new Diablo content and games, I decided to go ahead and revisit this game and for us to answer the very important questions of the original storyline, but most importantly, which house is yours, and also, who is the lone hero and where did he come from? So, of course, when you start in the world of Diablo, you're going to actually come to the end town of Tristram, and when you do, you're going to meet very different and many characters in the world that you left behind. You're going to first meet the local drunk named Farnham, who basically has a backstory that doesn't really get too far into it, but to discuss how he got to the point where he was so scared and so ensued by rage, fear, and anger that he starts his daily routine drinking and drinking and drinking. Next, we talk to the next town healer, which is Pepin, who actually is just there to heal each and everyone without very much resources that is in his house, as well as everything around. You think you've got him bad? The snowstorms we had here in Texas recently, not even close with Pepin, the healer, who does help our lonely adventurer whenever he needs free heals, potions, as well as also rejuvenation potions later on. Of course, when you start the game, though, you are formally introduced with Ogden, who's actually the innkeeper of the Tavern of the Rising Sun, who is the only tavern here in town that basically ensures that everybody is not only filled with food and with drink, but also to talk about their sorrows and to actually populate the town with whatever funding that they can. This is honestly one of the biggest places that everybody kind of visits and goes to, and also becomes even more relevant in the future Diablo games. And Ogden, of course, a very close friend of yours, or at least insinuates that when you first meet him. What's also interesting is in the original Diablo is that you just came back from an adventure of some sort, and basically insinuates and also acknowledges that this is actually your home and you've come back from an adventure from previously. Of course, as you play the game throughout, you never really understand or find out why it is you left, and also looking at the map itself, not even sure where you came from or where you left. But we'll talk about those details in a bit. And then, of course, after you meet Ogden, the next two people, which is also the most influential, is Kane and Griswold. Deckard Kane is the lonely guy that basically is from the Herondrum, who is by the well that is here to help you throughout your time here at Tristram. Not only does he talk about legends of old and stories that may or may not be necessarily true in the world, the Sin War and other wars that happen from heaven, hell, demons, and angels, but also shows and discusses the occasional insight on everybody here in town, including Farnham, Wirt, and even Griswold. Griswold, probably the man to visit the most, is also the other big moneymaker here in Tristram, as he is the lonely blacksmith that makes all the weapons, armor, and everything that is needed basically for here in Diablo. He will sell you and repair all your goods as needed, and he also scales on the actual weapons and things that are offered as you continue to move through the levels down here in Tristram of the cathedral underneath. As you find out a little bit more, Griswold is also a lone hero that basically saved the kid known as Wirt that actually has been taken down into the cathedral that's across town. And Wirt in himself is also saved and alive with a lack of one leg, also known as the peg leg, which in and of itself becomes in the future Diablo games a weapon that is also used as a special item, usually just for customization purposes or just a special legendary for Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. Word, of course, has grown up very fast as a young boy, as he has learned the ways of awful things that come out of the night and the darkness, with also his parents being killed. But he does give you a gamble, the ability for you to pay a little bit up front to see any spectacular and amazing legendary items. Personally, I haven't really gotten really good luck with his randomness, but there has been some good points that he's provided that. Last few characters that you actually run into is Jillian and Adria. Jillian is the lonely barmaid who also takes care of her grandmother here in town, but also kind of gives off the impression that she and her grandmother have empathic abilities, basically seeing the future. Adria, the Lonely Town Witch, is the other one that's in the far top right of the town. She's technically not even part of the main area of Tristram, but lives on the outskirts. She, of course, foretells and gives off this impression of fear and anger, as well as some very bad omens of the future. Of course, Adria does do a lot, especially if you pick the class of the wizard, as she will offer a lot of staffs, books, and magical properties that you would love to use, learn tales and adventures down in the cathedral. Of course, she only provides help and assistance that benefits her with the use of the actual gold that's provided, but of course is later on kind of indicated to be even more involved with the story, which I'll get to towards the end. And last but not least, we have a lonely cow, which happens to exist by the cathedral, and a slain townsman entrance of the cathedral, who does allude awful time, as he was led with the Archbishop Lazarus, is the ultimate mastermind, which is what actually brought the King Leoric to town in order to actually lead Tristram, which of course the only time you actually fight or see King Leoric is actually the Skeleton King, which is later on hinted and a quest provided. Of course, you will actually fight Archbishop Lazarus towards the end of the tale, in addition to one of the more gruesome demons, at least in the early times, which is the Butcher, which the slain townsman actually indicates to. What's really amazing with this particular story is everything kind of takes place in Tristram and the levels below. As Ogden and you come into town, which again, not entirely sure where, since the entire town is isolated, just like Silent Hills, but is basically hinted by Ogden that the cathedral's been desecrated and run by dark rituals, magic, and terrible, awful hordes of Diablo himself. Of course, as you go down for the first 5 levels, you fight a bunch of skeleton zombies, and of course different types of terrible, awful traps and evil things in order to get the loot, the gold, and items that you will use to continue to slay these forces. As you kind of go through the first 5 levels, you will eventually find different ways to get back into town. On the 6th level into the cave section, you will then be able to actually go back up to town through the use of a mausoleum, or a crypt in this case, opens up. As you go deeper, the hordes and everything you fight becomes harder and harder. The first demon you actually fight in the first 5 levels, known as the Butcher, actually becomes a normal demon that you fight later on in the caves, as well as even a crazy, horrible wizard that you run into along the way. Of course, there's different quests, which is really cool with this particular game, as all of these levels are randomized and the different quests are provided at different points. So in the first 5 levels, there may be a case where you actually may have stained water here in Tristram, and you need to actually go into the area where the water is being taken from, which I don't know why or how, because the well would be awful. As you kill these demons and evil, their very presence taints the water, which causes everyone to be sick, and of course Pepin to continue to heal them. The nice thing too is, as you continue to go down in these levels, you'll start finding text about the different things in the Sin War, as well as alluding to your future and later more horrible villain of all that's the cause of all of this is Diablo himself, which also translates to the devil, which is located on the last floor at the bottom. It's a really fantastic game as you continue to go through, and I know we went through a lot of great information, but I know the main reason you came to this channel is you want to find out, since you're from this Tristram, what house is yours? I mean, obviously, we're going to see Ogden in the tavern. Jillian is going to be with her grandmother. We have Pepin in his actual townhouse there. We're going to see Wirt. He's going to actually be located on the outskirts, but he'll have the bigger actual house there on the map of Tristram, as you can see here, because a big family like himself with parents that are, no longer around, but is now his. And then, of course, you're going to see Farnham. That's going to be closest to his. And then Kane, of course, is an older Haradrim that isn't going to be able to go very far. He's going to need to go to the closest house that's there. And then, of course, Griswold owns his own shop as well as his house there. Now, which leads us to the next thing. Throughout the game itself, you have the ability to actually cast town portals. Then opens up, you go through it, and then you kind of pop out and into the Tristram. Now, Adria doesn't actually have a house, as she has a shack in the corner of the outskirts of it, which looks like a traveling shack mostly. I mean, if you can really say that. However, the house that is going to be the closest to your town's portal is probably going to be the best bet, as the one major and lonely hero of Tristram is probably going to be owned by you. And of course, if you were to talk to Ogden and the rest of the townsfolk, which of course there's not many folks that are even there to continue with business, I mean, they're going to gift you that particular house. It's a little bit unconfirmed, mainly because of the fact that we can't go in each of these houses to actually see the items included, like you can with the future Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, but the evidence then supports that. The other thing too, which is very odd in the actual town of Tristram, is there is a lonely patch, which looks like there should be a structure there of somewhere, but isn't, which is there at the bottom right of the screen. Not entirely sure if that was supposed to be an entrance or not, but it is an interesting portion there. Of course, if you look further in the outskirts of it, which this map will actually show that, it's also got other patches and things of that nature. But of course, this was just to simplify the simple story, and probably for performance purposes is why they didn't include an actual entrance, also to encase you into Tristram. But yeah, the question remains though, how did you get back in town? That's the biggest question that I'm sure many have asked, and also kind of signifies, how do they actually get money from traveling caravans back in this time? Of course, we will never ever know, and of course it will never be discussed further because this is such a lonely and old game. So the final portion of the actual Diablo story continues further. As you continue to go down into the levels, you do find out that not only have you've been defeating all the forces of evil, but as Archbishop Lazarus, succubus, and also awful, kind of flame wizard type beings towards the end, gargoyles, and everything that you could probably think of under hell. Funny. But at the end, in the final level, you do come to fighting Diablo. Once you take care of all the forces kind of around Diablo and then actually fight Diablo himself, he actually does not become that much of a pain. What's interesting though about the ending is, of course, in the end, it actually shows a little bit of the CG that you find that Diablo is not only just a demon, but actually just a soul stone that was embedded in someone's head and had become Diablo himself. Of course, you being the hero with all this knowledge and great and wonderful things is somehow, of course, at the end, with all this knowledge, you as the hero somehow are still tempted to actually become this mighty and ultimately powerful demon. Decide to not just take the world stone for yourself, but to stick it in your own head, so then you become the lone wanderer for the next particular Diablo 2 game, which is signified and shown on the title with the skull and the cloak on the cover of Diablo 2. What is interesting though is that this particular story, as much as it continues on through from Diablo 1 to Diablo 2, is eventually changed when you go to Diablo 3 and you run into Adria, who happens to be the mother of Leah, who is a main protagonist character with Deckard Kane in Diablo 3, admits she has become almighty and powerful to create Leah, have intercourse with the lone wanderer, which she actually says is the prince of Leoric. So in Diablo 3's kind of timeline, they indicated that Leoric's prince or son is actually the lone wanderer that you are playing in Diablo 1. Of course, this is not necessarily true, and so the theory of saying that the Prince of Leoric was the Lone Wanderer to begin with, I think is kind of false. However, they're updating the narrative for it to match that. So it's kind of a little bit of a mismatch of information as you play Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, as the Lone Wanderer is actually just you as the nameless hero from Diablo 1. However, Diablo 3 changes that with, like I mentioned, and kind of you in itself not only caused Diablo 2 as the hero, but also caused Leah, who ultimately caused issues and problems to bring Diablo back from the dead in Diablo 3. So because you, as the lone hero in Diablo 1, wanted to save the lonely world of Tristram, you ultimately caused not only Diablo 2 and 3 to happen and bring Diablo back from the dead, but also continued enjoyment of the Diablo franchise. Thanks, Blizzard, and thanks everything else from that. Anyway, that was kind of an outline, a lore, and a discussion about Tristram, what house is yours in Tristram, and also the Lone Wanderer in causing all of the problems and issues in future Diablo titles. So, I hope you enjoyed this, I hope it was fun, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.